It's June 5th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the launch of South Korea's Lee Jae-myung administration. President Lee is set to hold his first cabinet meeting on Thursday, after having convened the first meeting of his Emergency Economic Evaluation Task Force as its first executive order on Inauguration Day. South Korea's Korea Hydro nuclear power has sealed a final contract to build nuclear reactors in the Czech Republic, following the lifting of a court injunction that had blocked the deal. The $18.6 billion deal will be South Korea's first overseas nuclear power plant contract in 16 years. U.S. President Donald Trump held a 75-minute phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday, only to confirm that Russia will respond to Ukraine's drone attacks on air bases in Russia on Sunday, further moving away from immediate peace in Ukraine. The new South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung got to work immediately after being elected on Wednesday, which means he began his duties at the presidential office in Yongsan, where he also named individuals for some of his administration's key posts. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young starts us off.
Day one of the Lee Jae-myung administration began at the break of dawn, with the new South Korean leader's duties beginning upon the National Election Commission's confirmation of his presidency. As he stepped out for his first commute from his home in Gyeonggo District, Incheon, Lee and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung spent about 10 minutes shaking hands with supporters and expressing their gratitude. As per tradition for all newly elected leaders, President Lee made a visit to the Seoul National Cemetery to honor the nation's war dead and heroes before heading to the National Assembly for his inauguration ceremony. Despite his push to move the presidential office back to the palatial grounds of Cheongwade, undoing his predecessor's relocation to the city centre, Lee launched his administration in Yongsan. Awaiting his arrival, the flag bearing the presidential phoenix was once again raised as of early Wednesday. Staying true to his pledge to begin his duties straight away, the president personally announced his key appointments.
존경하는 국민 여러분, 지금 우리는 경제와 민생 회복 그리고 지속 가능한 성장의 토대를 다시 세워야 할 시점입니다. 저는 오늘 국민에 대한 충직함과 책임 그리고 실력을 갖춘 인사들과 함께 국민 주권 정부의 새 출발을 시작합니다.
In a briefing to reporters, Lee named four-time lawmaker Kim Min-seok as Prime Minister nominee and as National Intelligence Service Director, former Unification Minister Lee Jong-seok, who's an experienced negotiator and policy expert in inter-Korean relations. These two positions require parliamentary approval. However, senior aides working directly with the president assumed their positions right away, without a separate vetting process. Lee appointed as his chief presidential secretary lawmaker Kang Won-sik, one of the key strategists behind his election campaigns. Former ambassador to Russia Wi Song-rak now heads the National Security Office as National Security Advisor. Former Army General Hwang In-kwon leads the Presidential Security Service, tasked with protecting the president and his family. Professor-turned-politician Kang Yoo-jung has become the presidential spokesperson. As for future ministerial appointments, President Lee said he would like to take his time to gather opinions from the public, the ruling and opposition parties and members of the media. He further said restructuring the presidential office won't happen today or tomorrow, as his administration will focus first on emergency measures for economic recovery. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
President Lee held the first meeting of his Emergency Economic Evaluation Task Force on the night of his inauguration, underscoring his pledge to focus on repairing the economy first. Creating the task force as his first executive order, Lee convened an emergency meeting with vice ministers and working-level officials from the Ministries of Finance, SMEs, and Transport for 2 hours and 20 minutes. According to the presidential office, he listened to opinions on trade issues with the U.S. and discussed measures concerning people's livelihoods. He also inquired about the fiscal capacity for a supplementary budget and its potential stimulative effects on the economy. Now, on Thursday today, he will hold his first cabinet meeting. The full cabinet had expressed intentions to resign upon his inauguration, but he rejected the move, only accepting the resignation of Justice Minister Park Sung-jae. So the new president's first executive order was launching an emergency task force to tackle urgent economic challenges and make the daily lives of the people better in tangible ways. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin takes a closer look.
South Korea's newly elected president Lee Jae-myung is swiftly moving to deliver on a key campaign pledge, revival of the economy. His spokesperson announced on Wednesday that President Lee had signed his first executive order.
On June 4, 2025, his first day in office, President Lee Jae-myung signed his first executive order calling for the establishment of an emergency economic task force.
This comes as growth projections for South Korea's economy have been revised downward by both domestic and foreign institutions. The Bank of Korea just last week slashed its GDP growth forecast for this year to 0.8% from 1.5% in its economic outlook report. And the OECD on Tuesday lowered South Korea's 2025 growth forecast to 1%, down 0.5 percentage points from its earlier projection. While it is yet unclear who will take on the dual role of finance and deputy prime minister, the appointee is expected to lead the task force in overseeing pressing economic issues. This includes overseeing a planned economic supplementary budget amounting to 30 trillion won or $22 billion to boost domestic demand. But as the ruling Democratic Party is expected to maintain a majority in the National Assembly for the next 3 years until the 2028 general election, the new administration is likely to face fewer hurdles in carrying out its policy agenda. The new administration will also have to navigate high-stakes negotiations with the Trump administration. Korea and the U.S. held high-level trade talks in April where the two countries agreed to reach a comprehensive agreement dubbed the July Package by July 8th, the date that the 90-day pause on Trump's reciprocal tariff rates on foreign nations is set to expire. The Ministry of Economy and Finance is also expected to be restructured as Lee, since his candidacy, has pledged to transfer the Finance Ministry's budgeting role to a separate body. The ministry currently oversees both economic policy and budget allocation, but Lee argues this concentrates too much power in one place. The separation of the budgeting function is expected to allow other ministries to gain more autonomy and accountability over their spending, while allowing the finance ministry to focus more on coordinating overall economic policy. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
North Korea's state media on Thursday reported on the result of South Korea's presidential election for the first time, noting that Lee Jae-myung was elected South Korea's new president. So the North kept the reports brief and short. Let us discuss more with Dr. Bruce Bennett. Welcome back, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So the Korean Central News Agency briefly said Lee Jae-myung, a candidate from the Democratic Party, was elected as South Korea's president. Why no big reaction from the North, do you think?
Well, fundamentally, in this kind of case, we just don't know. But if I were to speculate, I would say that Kim Jong-un is trying his very best to avoid creating any kind of interest in outside information. Kim wants to cut off, to extent possible, the absorption of his elites of outside information. So he's going to make even an important event like this a very small issue.
Well, President Lee Jae-myung, he pledged to push for peace and dialogue. That's not a surprise, saying peace is cheaper than war. Now, he specifically said he'll make sure to discover ways to coexist with North Korea without war. What does that mean? Does it mean Seoul will reach out to Pyongyang first?
Well, I think he will try to reach out to Pyongyang. The problem is that Kim Jong-un has said that he wants no negotiations with his principal enemy, which is South Korea. So either Kim changes his mind and takes a new approach, which seems not very likely, or President Lee and President Trump need to get together and come up with a new approach.
You know, bringing North Korea back to dialogue won't be an easy project, considering how inter-Korean ties have been, so frosty for the past few years under the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Now, how do you think the new South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will, try to bring North Korea back to the discussion table?
Well, Kim Jong-un has resisted any kind of negotiations. That could be a negotiating ploy in which he's trying to get concessions up front. That's pretty much what he's been asking for from the United States, and he did. He got President Trump to say that North Korea is a nuclear power. That was a pretty substantial concession. But Kim didn't make any big deal about it and didn't respond positively. So I think it's going to be very hard to come up with any kind of concession within reason that doesn't look like we're being too extreme in order to get him to the negotiating table. We may have to take a very different approach and give him specific proposals in a carrot and stick kind of manner. If you do this, we'll give you this. If you don't, then you're going to pay this penalty.
Under certain conditions, maybe. Now, Dr. Bennett, I do have to note that the shift in the change in the South Korean leadership comes during the second term of office for U.S. President Donald Trump. And, U.S. President Donald Trump is currently preoccupied with his own matters, tariffs, the Ukraine war, Gaza war, so many things. But Trump will one day reach out to North Korea, or he has already reached out to North Korea, I'm sure. But how can the Lee Jae-myung government make sure, South Korea is not left out there?
Well, there's been some press today about President Lee trying to contact and talk on the phone with President Trump in the next few days. And I think that's exactly the right approach. President Lee needs to make President Trump understand that he is very interested in what President Trump thinks. He wants to cooperate with him. He's prepared to be responsive to what President Trump wants. And in that regard, he's got to pay attention to the fact that Secretary of Defense Hegseth just said at the Shangri-La dialogue that he's looking for the countries in Asia to increase their defense budgets. President Lee plans to increase his national government budget. Part of that could be an increase in his defense budget as part of a supplemental application. And that would probably catch President Trump's attention and make him think that President Lee is listening and being responsive.
Well, Dr. Bennett, North Korea's nuclear and missile ambitions are growing only day by day as we are speaking now with the regime's troop deployment to the Ukraine crisis. Now, how can the Lee and Trump administrations, put their heads together against North Korea's ever-growing military threats? I'm sure U.S. troop withdrawal from South Korea can absolutely not be an option, right?
Well, one would think that that's not an option. It doesn't serve the interests of either of our countries. Even for the U.S., even if we focus primarily on China as an adversary, what place is there other than South Korea that's closer to China and gives us more presence to deal with the Chinese threat?
Right.
So it's in our interest to cooperate. The question is how. And there are ways. One does not have to sit down at the negotiating table to negotiate. One can put out unilateral proposals to North Korea and say, if you close the uranium enrichment facility you showed us last year and put it under IAEA inspections, we're prepared to give you some relief of sanctions. If you don't, we're prepared to take more extreme actions because we want to reduce the nuclear threat you're growing that even China's not very happy about and would like to see reduced.
Right. Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for your insights and connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
South Korea's economy contracted in the first quarter of this year, primarily due to sluggish construction investment and exports. Now, data from the Bank of Korea on Thursday showed that the country's GDP from January to March shrank by 0.2% on quarter, spurred by domestic and international economic uncertainties. Now, this was mainly due to a 3.1% fall in construction investment and a 0.6% decrease in exports. South Korea has signed a nuclear power plant project with the Czech Republic, which had been put on hold after a rival bidder had filed an injunction. Now, this multi-billion-dollar deal will be the first for Seoul in 16 years. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
The nuclear plant deal between the Czech Republic and South Korea has finally been sealed. Representatives from the Dukovany 2 power plant and the Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power on Wednesday signed final contracts to build 2 new nuclear power reactors in the Czech Republic. Czech Prime Minister Petra Fiala said on the same day all doubts and legal obstacles that prevented the nuclear power plant project from being launched had been removed. The signing of the deal came only hours after the Czech High Court lifted an injunction barring the deal from closing. The two parties were originally to sign the contract on May 7th, until the losing bidder EDF of France had filed for and won an injunction, delaying the project's timeline. However, Dukovany and KHNP appealed the ruling, and the court declared that the injunction was unverifiable. The $18.6 billion deal will result in the expansion of the Dukovany nuclear site with the construction of 2 1,000-megawatt units, with the first to be completed by 2036. This deal is the first such project for KHNP in Europe and the company's first overseas project since a deal made with the UAE in 2009. According to pundits, the deal proves South Korea's technical skills and economic feasibility for nuclear plants, while they also say it could be a turning point for Seoul's nuclear plant expansion into the European market. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he held phone talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. However, Trump says the discussions would not lead to immediate peace in Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump took to his Truth Social on Wednesday, saying he held phone talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to Trump, the two leaders discussed Ukraine's recent drone attacks against a Russian airfield, with Putin saying he was obligated to respond to the weekend attacks. The U.S. president noted that the 75-minute-long conversation with his Russian counterpart would not immediately lead to an end to the war in Ukraine. The phone talks between the two come as Trump said last week that he would be able to see within 2 weeks whether Putin was serious about agreeing to a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, the chance at a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine seems to be getting bleaker, as Putin accused Ukraine of terrorism and disrupting peace talks. During a televised government meeting on Monday, Putin shot down Ukraine's call for an unconditional ceasefire, saying that Kyiv's leadership has resorted to terrorist attacks to intimidate Russia. Putin said that he cannot negotiate with those who rely on terror or with terrorists, adding that a break from a military action would only allow Ukraine to gather more Western weapons and prepare other terrorist attacks. His remarks came in response to a series of explosions that allegedly caused bridge collapses in Russia over the weekend, including one that derailed a passenger train, killing 7 people. Despite this, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Wednesday proposed an unconditional ceasefire with Russia until a summit with Putin is held. He also proposed possible venues for the meeting, including Istanbul, Switzerland, and the Vatican. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Pope Leo XIV and Russian President Vladimir Putin also held phone talks on Wednesday, with the war in Ukraine part of their discussion. According to the director of the Holy See Press Office, Matteo Bruni, the Pope and Putin discussed humanitarian issues as well as the need for aid where necessary. The Pope called for a gesture from Moscow that would favor peace, stressing the need for dialogue to create a positive context between the parties and seek solutions to the conflict. The Pope and the Russian president also discussed ongoing efforts for prisoner exchanges.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. The United States has vetoed a United Nations Security Council draft resolution that called for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. On Wednesday, the U.S. exercised its veto power to block a UN Security Council resolution that demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the unrestricted delivery of humanitarian aid to the region. All 14 other Security Council members supported the draft resolution. Acting U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Dorothy Shea, defended the veto, stating that the resolution failed to condemn Hamas for its October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, did not call for the group's disarmament, nor its withdrawal from Gaza. She said, "We would not support any measure that fails to condemn Hamas and does not call for Hamas to disarm and leave Gaza." The U.S. also vetoed the last Security Council resolution on Gaza in November. Russia said on Wednesday that its Crimean Bridge remains fully operational with no damage. This comes after Ukraine detonated explosives on the strategically significant bridge. In the early hours of Tuesday, Ukraine's security service said it conducted a coordinated underwater attack on the Crimean Bridge, deploying explosives equivalent to 1,100 kilograms of TNT. The SBU released footage showing a blast beneath the bridge, claiming severe damage. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov acknowledged this explosion, but stated nothing was damaged. The bridge is working, dismissing Ukraine's claims of structural harm. This was Ukraine's third attack on the bridge since Russia's full-scale war began in 2022. The bridge is considered a significant military supply route for Russian forces in Crimea. Bulgaria will become the 21st nation to adopt the euro at the start of next year after receiving approval from the European Central Bank and the European Commission on Wednesday. The decision follows Bulgaria's fulfillment of all convergence criteria, including inflation control, fiscal stability, and exchange rate alignment. Bulgaria's prime minister hailed the approval as a milestone, emphasizing its potential to bolster foreign investment and deepen Bulgaria's integration into the European Union. However, pro-Russian groups protested, expressing concerns over national sovereignty and potential worsening poverty and inflation. Finally, Nintendo's highly anticipated Switch 2 gaming console is poised to exceed initial sales forecasts as it prepares for its global release on June 5th. The company projects sales of 15 million units by March 2026, but analysts suggest the number will exceed that. Pre-orders have sold out rapidly worldwide, with Japan alone receiving over 2.2 million applications. Despite the $449.99 price point, consumers are enthusiastic about the Switch 2's enhanced features, including a larger LCD screen and improved processing power.
Today marks Bangjong, the third of summer's seasonal terms, and true to the season, it's going to be quite warm this afternoon. Most parts will see summer warmth sticking around through the weekend. And also the skies will be mostly clear nationwide with clean air blowing in. Our air quality will be good. And with a gentle breeze, it almost feels like autumn rather than spring thanks to clear blue skies we've had lately. But strong sunlight will boost UV rays during the hottest parts of the day, so wear hats or carry UV umbrellas to protect yourselves. And this afternoon's Seoul will reach 27 degrees, Daejeon, Gwangju topping out at 28 degrees. But at least the humidity won't be high, so the heat will not feel overwhelming, and it will cool down quickly once the sun sets. It will be mostly clear across the country with afternoon summer warmth through next week, excluding Jeju, where rain is in the forecast this weekend.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time.